The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of the Orphanage of Divine Mercy in São Paulo, Brazil, on March 15, 1993. A gentle breeze carried the scent of jacaranda blossoms through the air as hundreds of children lined the windows and balconies of the weathered building, their faces pressed against the glass like flowers turning toward light. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional whisper of anticipation that rippled through the crowd of young souls who had gathered for something they had only dreamed of in their deepest wishes. Michael Jackson stood in the center of the courtyard, his black fedora tilted slightly forward, casting shadows across his pale features. He wore his iconic black military-style jacket with silver embellishments that caught the Brazilian sunlight like scattered stars. The children who surrounded him seemed to hold their breath collectively, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might cause this magical moment to dissolve like morning mist. Some clutched handmade drawings. Others held small gifts wrapped in newspaper, their treasures prepared with the careful devotion that only children possess when meeting their hero. The visit had been arranged quietly, without fanfare or media attention. Michael had insisted on it this way after hearing about the orphanage during his Dangerous World Tour stop in São Paulo. Sister Maria Elena, the elderly nun who ran the facility, had written him a simple letter months earlier, not expecting a response, but hoping that perhaps, somehow, her words might reach the man whose music had brought such joy to her children during their darkest moments. When his security team arrived that morning to arrange the visit, she had wept openly, her weathered hands trembling as she crossed herself and whispered prayers of gratitude. Among the sea of eager faces stood a girl of perhaps 12 years old, her dark hair braided with ribbons that had seen better days, her brown eyes bright with an intelligence that seemed to burn from within. Her name was Isabel, and she had been at the orphanage since she was 7, when her parents died in a car accident that left her without family, but not without dreams. She had taught herself languages by listening to the radio broadcasts that drifted through the orphanage walls from the international stations, collecting words like precious gems and practicing conversations with herself in the mirror each night. Portuguese was her native tongue, but she had mastered Spanish from the Mexican soap operas the older children watched, French from the classical music programs, Italian from the opera broadcasts, German from the late-night educational shows, English from Michael Jackson's own songs that played endlessly on the radio, Japanese from the anime cartoons that occasionally appeared on television, Russian from the old documentary films, and Mandarin from the Chinese cultural programs that aired on Sunday mornings. As Michael moved through the crowd, stopping to hug each child, to listen to their shy whispers, to accept their gifts with the same reverence they offered them, Isabel felt her heart racing like a hummingbird's wings. She had practiced this moment countless times in her mind, rehearsing the words she would say if she ever had the chance to meet the man whose voice had carried her through the loneliest nights when the other children slept and she lay awake wondering if anyone in the world would ever truly understand her dreams of traveling beyond these walls to see the places where all her languages were spoken. The crowd of children seemed to part naturally as Michael approached her section of the courtyard, and Isabel felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a cloak. She stepped forward slightly, her small hands clasped in front of her, and when Michael's eyes met hers, she saw something that made her believe in magic again. There was a kindness there that ran deeper than performance, a gentleness that seemed to recognize something in her that even she didn't fully understand yet. "Hello," Michael said softly, his voice carrying that unmistakable quality that had made him famous around the world. But here, in this moment, it was simply the voice of someone who cared. "What's your name, beautiful?" Isabel took a breath that seemed to draw in all the courage she had ever possessed and replied, "My name is Isabel, and I speak 9 languages." The words tumbled out in English, clear and precise despite her nervousness, and she watched as Michael's eyebrows raised slightly in surprise and delight. Michael smiled then, that radiant expression that had illuminated stages across the globe, but this smile was different. This smile was personal, intimate, meant only for her. 9 languages, he repeated, his voice filled with genuine amazement. "That's incredible." Which languages do you speak? The other children had gathered closer now, forming a circle around Isabel and Michael, their whispers creating a soft susurrus of anticipation that seemed to make the very air vibrate with expectation. Sister Maria Elena stood at the edge of the group, her hands pressed to her heart, tears already beginning to form in her eyes as she watched this extraordinary moment unfold. Isabel straightened her shoulders and began to speak, switching between languages with the fluid grace of a conductor leading an orchestra. She greeted him in Portuguese, then Spanish, then French, each phrase flowing into the next like verses of a multilingual poem. She continued in Italian, then German, her pronunciation careful and clear, then Japanese, Russian, and finally Mandarin, each language a different color in the rainbow of her extraordinary gift. The silence that followed was profound, as if the entire world had paused to absorb what they had just witnessed. Michael stood perfectly still, his eyes wide with wonder, his hands slowly rising to rest over his heart, as if to contain the emotion that was building there like a rising tide. The children around them seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening, something that transcended the ordinary boundaries of a celebrity visit and entered the realm of pure human connection. "That was beautiful," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely beautiful. How'd you learn all of those languages?" Isabel felt a warmth spreading through her chest as she explained how she had taught herself by listening to the radio, by watching television when she could, by collecting words and phrases like treasures and practicing them until they became part of her soul. As she spoke, Michael nodded slowly, his expression growing more amazed with each word, and Isabel could see something changing in his eyes, a recognition that seemed to go beyond mere admiration. Then Michael did something that shocked everyone present, something that would be remembered and retold for decades to come. He knelt down on the concrete of the courtyard, bringing himself to Isabel's eye level, his expensive clothes forgotten as he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small, worn notebook that he always carried with him during tours. The notebook contained his most private thoughts, his song ideas, his dreams written in his own careful handwriting. "Isabel," he said, his voice carrying a gravity that made everyone lean closer to hear, "I want to make you a promise. I'm going to help you go to university. I'm going to make sure you get the education you deserve, because someone with your gift, someone with your determination and your beautiful mind deserves every opportunity in the world." The gasp that rose from the crowd of children was audible, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the courtyard. Sister Maria Elena's hands flew to her mouth as tears began streaming down her cheeks, and the other children stared in amazement as their beloved Isabel stood face to face with destiny itself. But Michael wasn't finished. He tore a page from his notebook and began writing on it, his pen moving quickly across the paper as he wrote down his personal contact information, the names and numbers of his education foundation representatives, and a personal note that promised to follow through on his commitment. Then he folded the paper carefully and placed it in Isabel's trembling hands, his own hands covering hers for a moment as he looked directly into her eyes. "Promise me something, Isabel," he said softly. "Promise me that you'll use this gift of yours to build bridges between people, to help them understand each other across the languages and cultures that sometimes divide us. Promise me that you'll remember that communication is the greatest gift we can give to the world." Isabel nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks as she clutched the paper to her heart. "I promise," she whispered in English, then repeated the promise in each of her 9 languages, her voice growing stronger with each repetition until the final promise, spoken in Mandarin, rang out across the courtyard like a bell. The crowd of children erupted then, not in chaotic noise, but in something more beautiful, a sound that was part applause, part crying, part celebration of the magic they had just witnessed. Michael stood slowly, his own eyes glistening with tears, and pulled Isabel into a gentle hug that seemed to last forever and not nearly long enough. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories about the moments that remind us of the profound impact one person can have on another's life. As the afternoon wore on, Michael spent time with each child, but everyone understood that something special had happened with Isabel, something that transcended the usual boundaries of celebrity philanthropy and entered the realm of genuine human transformation. When it was time for Michael to leave, he removed his black fedora and placed it gently on Isabel's head, the brim falling down over her eyes as she looked up at him through the shadow it cast. "This is to remind you," he said, adjusting the hat slightly, so she could see that dreams are meant to be worn, not just wished for. The years that followed proved Michael's promise to be more than mere words spoken in a moment of emotion. Isabel received a full scholarship to the University of São Paulo, where she studied international relations and linguistics. She went on to earn advanced degrees from universities in France and Japan, becoming a renowned interpreter for the United Nations and eventually establishing her own foundation to provide language education for underprivileged children around the world. But more than the professional success, more than the degrees and accolades, what Isabel treasured most was the lesson Michael had taught her that day about the power of recognition, about what happens when someone sees potential in another person and chooses to nurture it rather than simply admire it. She kept his notebook page framed in her office, the handwriting faded, but the promise as clear as the day it was written. The hat, Michael's fedora, sat on a special stand in her home, and on difficult days when the world seemed too divided by language and misunderstanding, she would take it down and hold it, remembering the weight of it on her 12-year-old head and the feeling of being seen, truly seen, for who she could become rather than simply who she was. Sister Maria Elena, now retired but still living at the orphanage, would often tell visitors about that magical afternoon when the king of pop knelt in their courtyard and changed one young girl's life forever. She would point to the plaque that now hung by the entrance, a gift from Isabel years later, inscribed with a quote in 9 languages: "Communication is the greatest gift we can give to the world." In 2009, when news of Michael's death reached the orphanage, Isabel flew back from Geneva, where she was working as a senior interpreter for peace negotiations, to attend a special memorial service in the very courtyard where their lives had intersected. She stood in the same spot where she had first spoken those 9 languages to the man who would change her destiny. And she spoke again, this time a eulogy that moved between languages like a prayer, thanking him not just for the opportunities he had provided, but for the deeper gift of believing in the power of human potential. The children who attended that memorial service had never met Michael Jackson, but they understood, through Isabel's presence and through the stories they had heard, that something extraordinary had happened in their home. Something that proved that magic was real when it took the form of one human being recognizing and nurturing the dreams of another. As the evening shadows fell across the courtyard and the memorial service came to an end, Isabel placed a single white glove on the spot where Michael had knelt all those years ago. The glove caught the last rays of sunlight, gleaming like a promise kept, a dream fulfilled, a bridge built between the boy who had once been called strange for his gentleness and the girl who had been overlooked for her difference, both of them finding in each other the reflection of their own deep understanding that the most profound connections happen not through shared language, but through shared humanity. The wind picked up the white glove and carried it gently across the courtyard, where it came to rest against the base of the memorial plaque, as if Michael himself had placed it there, a final reminder that some promises transcend even death, and that the greatest performance of any life is not what happens on stage, but what happens when one heart recognizes and chooses to lift up another.